way the order will proceed is I'm going to talk a little bit about the experience of my team. I'm going to talk about the background, that is how the case got to us. I'm going to talk about the facts of the case. Then we'll go to the video analysis, and then we'll go to the conclusions. And again, like I said, at the end of this, we'll open up for some stories. So when we were handed the case in July of 2021, I brought together a host of experienced prosecutors, investigators, and a victim advocate in my office. We had combined with my 37 years of experience, we brought to the table about 137 years of prosecutorial experience and experience in the field of criminal law. Then, like I said, I contracted with Mr. Porter and brought his experience to bear as well. We also decided that after we looked at this case, that it was in need of expert analysis. So we went out and we hired experts to review everything from the audio tape, the videotape, the investigative files, the APD policies. Also, we wanted to see human reaction time and how a human responds to certain events of stress. And we had those experts break down the video in a frame-by-frame analysis, which had not been done prior to us handling having the case, and had not been done prior to that time. Mike Albin was our expert on the video analysis. We hired Force Science with Dr. Lewinsky and Von Klein for our expert analysis. And we requested that they put their findings in writing, and those will be available to you. Not at the end of today, but we will make those available to you at some time. Background of this case, and I think the background of this case is important. And I think it's important because we have to remember what mood our country was in 2020 when this happened. And we have to remember what mood our state was in. And so I'm going to go back all the way to May 29th when peaceful protests started about the George Floyd case, the Ahmaud Arbery case, and the Breonna Taylor case. And during those peaceful protests, as you know, they basically were in Atlanta, around the CNN building, and around Centennial Park. And after a while, some of those peaceful protests became violent. There was a destruction of building, destruction of property. And eventually, the mayor, on the next day, May 30th, had to declare a curfew. And that curfew lasted from May 30th until June 4th. And why is that important? I think it's important so you understand and the public understands under what atmosphere all this was happening. Now, I will say this, that this case of Devin Brosnan and of Garrett Rolfe is not like the George Floyd case. This is not a case in which an officer was kneeling on a prone suspect for 9 minutes. It's nothing like that. Nor is it like the Ahmaud Arbery case, where armed citizens were chasing a person down through a neighborhood. This case, its facts are different. Its facts are distinct to this case. But you can't ignore the fact that all of this was happening about the same time. On June 9th, just a few days later, about a week later, incumbent Paul Howard finished second in the primary to Fani Willis, who was a challenger for district attorney of what is the Atlanta Judicial Circuit, but many of us refer to it as the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. On June 12th is when Officers Brosnan and Officer Garrett Rolfe encountered Mr. Rayshard Brooks at the Wendy's on University Avenue in Atlanta, Georgia. And that's the day that this incident occurred. Just 5 days later, Fulton County District Attorney's investigator took out multiple warrants against Garrett Rolfe and against Devin Brosnan. I will say that at that point, the GBI had not completed its investigation. In fact, it would be 130 more days before a complete investigation was turned over to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. And as y'all know, on on August 11th, Paul Howard lost the race, the election to Miss Fani Willis. And then on January 25th of 2021, Fani Willis wrote a letter recusing her office from taking on this case based upon the conduct of her predecessor. On February 9th, Attorney General Chris Carr rejected that request to recuse her office. Ms. Willis asked him to reconsider, and he denied that reconsideration. The case then went on until April 6th, when a Fulton County Superior Court judge ordered D.A. Willis to show cause why she could not handle the case. On June 4th, after our hearing, the Superior Court judge in Fulton County recused Fonnie Willis from the case. And then on July 21st, Attorney General Carr appoints me, Pete Skandalakis, as the lead prosecutor in this case. After that point, we began to get our team together. We began requesting information, the case file. We began contacting Mr. Porter to see if we could contract with him to also look in the investigative file. We also contacted Ms. Tamika Miller. Ms. Tamika Miller is the widow of Rayshard Brooks. We made contact with her and brought her into the office and let her know that we had been appointed to the case, that we had not received a full case file yet, but that we would keep her apprised of everything that was happening. And when I say everything that was happening, from the time we received the case file to the time we hired the experts, to the time we received the experts' reports, we kept Ms. Miller advised of the situation and have even advised her today. I also want to point out, in preparation of this case, and I think it's important to understand, that before this press conference was called, we made contact with APD to let them know there would be a statement made today at 1:30. We contacted the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. We also contacted Morrow Police Department, and we contacted the governor's office as well as the Attorney General's office. And I'm sure I'm forgetting the Sheriff's Department, and I also spoke with Ms. Willis last night. So we have contacted all those people in preparation of this press conference. Now I'm going to go into a little bit of the facts on this case before I turn over the video analysis to Mr. Porter. On June 12, 2020, Mr. Rayshard Brooks was at the Wendy's on University Avenue in Atlanta, Georgia. And what had happened is, before 911 was even called that day, the employees were receiving complaints that there was a man passed out in behind the wheel of his vehicle in the drive-through lane. Now, if you remember back around that time when we were having COVID and all that, the drive-through was the only way you could get to the Wendy's. The dine-in was closed at that time. So the employees were receiving complaints that someone was blocking the drive-through. Eventually, the manager of Wendy's went out and knocked on the window of Mr. Rayshard Brooks, trying to wake him up. She knocked on the window, kept knocking on the window, was unable to wake him up. Finally, he woke up. He rolled down his window, and the manager asked him, "Would you please move your vehicle?" According to the statement made by the manager, the only thing Mr. Brooks did was stare at her, rolled the window back up, and he fell back asleep. One Wendy's employee reports to the GBI, made a statement to the GBI that prior to calling 911, that Mr. Brooks had been at that Wendy's, parked in that drive-through lane for about 40 minutes. Finally, a call was made to 911, and Officer Brosnan was the first officer to respond. And you will see part of this videotape when Mr. Porter plays a video analysis. Now, let me point out the videotapes that we have and the whole timeline of how long Mr. Brooks was in an encounter with the Atlanta police officers is 40 minutes and 23 seconds. Obviously, we're not going to play that entire video, all the body cam videos and the Wendy's video for you today. But the entire time is 40 minutes and 23 seconds. During that 40 minutes and 23 seconds, there is conversation between Mr. Brooks and the police officers. Much of it, if not all of it, is cordial. It doesn't become cordial. It switches from cordial to violent when the officers seek to place him under arrest for driving under the influence, and Mr. Brooks lunges at both officers and basically overpowers the officers. And you'll see that. Manages to take the taser away from one officer, tries to tase that officer 2 times, tries to tase the other officer another time, manages to take off running, and he's pursued by Mr. Rolfe. He fires a taser back at Mr. Rolfe, and Officer Rolfe fires his weapon. And Mr. Porter will go into that in detail. But prior to that, Devin Brosnan shows up, knocks on the window, cannot awaken Mr. Brooks. He finally opens the door to the vehicle and again tries to wake Mr. Brooks, finally gets Mr. Brooks to wake up and says, "Hey, you're blocking the drive-through. You need to move your car. Please move your car." And Mr. Brooks looks at him, says, "Okay." They shut the door. Brosnan begins walking back to his vehicle. Before Brosnan can get back to his vehicle, Mr. Brooks passes out again. Brosnan immediately turns back around, goes over, again knocks on the window, opens the door and says, "Hey, please move your vehicle. You got to move your vehicle." In one of those conversations, Brosnan even asks Brooks, he says, "Do you need medical attention? Do you need medical help?" Brooks says, "No, I'm fine." He says, "Well, you got to move your car." So he watches as Brooks moves his car out of the drive-through. And when Brooks moves his car out of the drive-through, what happens is Brooks drives over the curb onto the grass in a parking space. He then backs up into the parking space. Brosnan walks up to the car and asks Brooks for identification, goes back to his car, notices at that time the smell of alcohol. So he calls in for a DUI officer. That DUI officer, recognized as an expert in the DUI field, that DUI officer is Garrett Rolfe. About 10-15 minutes later, Garrett Rolfe arrives and asks a few questions of Officer Brosnan and says, "What's going on here?" Officer Brosnan explains to him the guy's been asleep behind the wheel of his car. I asked him to move his car. He drove over this curb. After he drove over this curb, I went to get his license. I noticed the smell of alcohol. Garrett Rolfe says, "Okay." Then Garrett Rolfe goes over to start talking to Brooks. And as he's talking, he's asking him, "Where are you? Where have you been?" Brooks tells Brosnan that he's in Forest Park. Brooks tells Rolfe that he's in Clayton County and that he's at a hotel. He stayed at a hotel just down the road. Well, he's not in Clayton County. He's not in Forest Park. He's in Atlanta, Georgia. They notice glassy-eyed, a little bit of slurred speech. They do field sobriety tests. I say they. Officer Rolfe does field sobriety tests, and then asks Brooks if he'll take a breathalyzer test. And he says, "Yes, I'll take the breath test, the portable breath test." He takes the portable breath test, and again, let me point out now, we're over about 39 minutes into this whole situation. The conversation's been cordial. Mr. Brooks has been very cooperative. The officers have been professional. Everything's going as planned. He takes the portable field test. It comes back .108. And as y'all know, over .08 in Georgia's over the legal limit, and you're presumed to be under the influence at that point. It comes back .08. Officer Rolfe tells him, "I think you've had too much to drink to be able to drive." And Officer Rolfe goes to place handcuffs on Mr. Brooks. And Officer Brosnan goes to get the other hand. When he does that, Brooks lunges forward and manages to get out of being handcuffed. He then is able to get Brosnan basically on his back. As he gets Brosnan on his back, he is getting control of Brosnan's taser. He grabs control of the taser. He finally gets control of the taser. And you'll also see in the video, and Mr. Porter will point this out, that at one time he strikes Officer Rolfe across the back of the neck, across the neck and the face. He gets the taser from Brosnan, and he tries to dry stun. He puts the taser against Brosnan's neck and tries to dry stun him. He then takes the taser, he aims it at Officer Rolfe and fires at Officer Rolfe. He also then, Brosnan now is on his knees. It's important to note that when all of them went down on their knees, Brosnan was on the bottom. Brosnan's head struck the concrete, the pavement of the Wendy's parking lot. He suffered a concussion, and he was a little bit out of it, but he managed to get to his knees. As Brosnan gets to his knees, Brooks holds the taser over him and fires almost point blank into his head. We know that the charge hits Brosnan in the hand, and Brosnan tells the police and the GBI that he felt the current going through his body. Again, Rolfe is trying to tase Brooks, but what happens, and again Mr. Porter will go through this with you, is the taser leads do not connect to make a good current. So one of them gets stuck in his clothing. Witnesses are reporting or videotaping this too, and Mr. Porter will go into that. Brosnan's on the ground. Rolfe is over a little bit of a distance. Brooks takes off. Again, he's out of it. He's on the ground, and Rolfe takes off after him. As Rolfe is chasing him, you can see Brooks turn and fire the taser more than once. I think it was 3 times. He fires the taser at Officer Rolfe. During one of the times when Brooks is turning and firing, that is when Rolfe switches from his taser, starts to pull out his weapon, fires 3 shots within 0.56 seconds. Mr. Porter will go all over that. Those are the facts of the case in a synopsis. I will tell you this, part of, if you've left your email address with you, we're going to send you a full, what is called a case report and legal analysis. We will email that to you as soon as this press conference is over, along with the press release. Now, this time I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Porter to go over this.
My name is Danny Porter. I was elected as district attorney in Gwinnett County in 1992. I left office after losing the election in 2020, and I retired at the end of 2020. I started as a prosecutor in 1981. Over the course of those 37 years, I prosecuted police officer and police officer misconduct, beginning in 1992, where I charged an officer with murder and sought the death penalty. I've tried officers that have assaulted women on the side of the road during traffic stops. I've prosecuted officers who assaulted motorists. One of them was my last year in office, which was publicized here in Atlanta, where 2 Gwinnett County officers assaulted a driver. So that's more or less what Pete asked me to do in this case, was to review the case and actually try and determine whether either of these officers face criminal charges. I think we need to make sure that we understand that our job in this case is only to decide whether or not these officers face criminal charges. We don't decide policy violations. We don't decide any other facts or any other issues other than that, and that was the nature of our review. I did take on the case after Pete asked me to. I know that I asked him, isn't there anybody else that will take this? And apparently no one else wanted it, so I was retired and I don't have anything to lose, so I said, what the heck, I'll do it, and was immediately sorry for that. But once I got into the case, it became very evident that this case was incredibly documented on video. There were cell phone videos, there was a Wendy's security video, there was body camera video, all of which gave a truly complete picture of the incident almost from the very beginning. But that videotape, I have sort of a rule, is that video never lies, but sometimes it doesn't always tell the truth. And truthfully, this video was, the video, because it was from so many sources and so many different kinds of video camera, didn't integrate very well in a way that you could coherently watch the original videos to determine what had happened. And I recommended that we hire an expert both in the use of force by police officers and to do the video analysis. And I recommended For Science, and they hired Mr. Albin as their video expert. So as we look at this case, initially with the video, it looked one way, but it became very clear, and we'll show you today with excerpts from those videos, that a different incident happened than has been released both by former prosecutors and by other sources. And what Pete described is clearly shown in the video. So what we're going to try and do today is try and show you initial points, and I'll describe the videos as they come and try and... Can I come around this podium? Okay, I'm going to... All right. So basically what we're going to talk about here is whether or not the officers had probable cause when the conflict began and their initial encounter. So the first video that we want to show you is this is Brosnan. This is Brosnan actually when he pulled up, and as police officers say, he went 10-8. I'm going to try to get it here. So this is when he Brosnan into the waves. The white car you see there, that's Mr. Brooks' car. As Brooks drives away, he pulls into a parking space, and it's not revealed on the camera, but he drives up over the curb into the grass, and then he has to back down into the parking space. see in the shadow of the car that Brosnan is observing his driving, and at some point he walks over to obtain the driver's license that Mr. Brooks has. He runs it for any outstanding warrants, and then at that point he begins to notice an odor of alcohol, and that Mr. Brooks's eyes are glassy and his speech is somewhat slurred, and he suspects that Mr. Brooks is under the influence of alcohol. So he then calls in a DUI officer. Atlanta has a policy where the patrol officers call in officers that are DUI trained in each zone. This is Garrett Rolfe, who appears as the zone DUI officer. These are body cam videos.
So he was in the driveway?
Yeah, he was on, the car's on. Took me like 2 minutes to wake him up, kept knocking, opened the door, like shook him. Woke up super groggy, because pretty good smell of alcohol beverage coming out of the car. Eyes were watery, glassy, slurs words, I'm sure it was. And tell me he had one drink, he said earlier. Standard size. I said, I think he's one drink, but I smell alcohol still. And he tried to tell me, where are you coming from? He said, I'm coming from Jonesboro. So what do you think? I got more food. So he's really not too clear, like, that can, I got here, got there, but I mean,
So this was a 911 call, right?
yeah, he had the driver called in.
So somebody called because he was in the driveway?
He passed out
in the driveway?
Yep.
Okay.
That's right.
Had to pull over?
Yeah, I had to move out of the way, and then when he pulled up, he actually just hit over the curb onto the grass and, like, backed it up.
Okay.
So I, believe he was in the driveway.
Sure. All right, we go talk to that. What's his name? David Lady?
Yeah.
Hey, Mr. Brooks. Mr. Brooks. How you doing? Hey, Officer Rolfe, Atlanta Police Department. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine.
All right, so tell me, I wasn't here, so can you tell me what...
This video is supposed to go on. Let me check it one more time.